G'day everyone, it's James Davis from the Pax8 Academy again. This time I've got Allan from Crisis Shield. How are you going, Allan?
I'm great, thanks, James.
Where in this wide world are you located?
At the moment, I'm in our head office in Melbourne, in Australia.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'm very appreciative of your time, and this is going to be a bit of a different conversation to probably what our partners are used to having, but we're going to be talking about crisis management today and those sort of practices that you roll out with your clients and some of those frameworks that people can learn and scale down to their SMB businesses and their clients. And I'm just really curious to kick things off and put you on the spot and ask you a question around crisis management. Is it best to be working out how to deal with a crisis when we're in the middle of one, or is there a better way?
Well, James, there is a better way. Nothing like something like poor planning ends up with a poor result. So if you haven't prepared for a crisis and you have one, it is extremely difficult to recover from that crisis. So I'll put it this way, it'll be a lot more pain and probably a lot more damage. Whereas if you've got a team, you've prepared for it, and when it happens, you will be so much better at responding to it. And I think probably a good analogy to that is, imagine if you've never done first aid training and you come across someone lying on the ground and you don't know what to do, as opposed to you've done first aid training, check for danger response, airways, breathing, circulation. So having that awareness, the training, and ideally having simulated a crisis event, if you have the real event, it's just so much easier to work through.
And so what do you see in the middle of a crisis and people haven't prepared? What are sort of the real common mistakes that people make that potentially make things worse?
Yeah. Well, look, starting from the basics, if first, how do you get notified about the crisis? So, I mean, some are very obvious. If all of a sudden there's a fire in your building, sure, you'll get alerted to that. But it might be something that's happened, whereas, for example, the auditor might have come through and say, look, there's a lot of money that's gone missing out of the business. It might be a cyber incident where someone says, look, there's something a little bit unusual here. We detected something. We're not quite sure, but something doesn't seem quite right. It could be, a staff member's been injured and taken to hospital, and it's a serious injury, but is that going to be recovered, or is that going to turn into a fatality? And we quite often find a lot of companies who haven't done this preparation work, don't know how to determine what is and isn't a crisis. And if I went around a room with 10 people and gave them different scenarios about what is and isn't a crisis, a lot would have different answers. So one of the key things to start with is having, we call a Severity Matrix. So it's an agreed position in the business of what's a crisis. And probably a good example, we do a lot of work in the aged care and childcare. Now, in a normal corporate office, if someone went missing, most companies would say, if someone goes missing for 4 hours, we wouldn't be worried. If they've gone missing for the day, we might put it at moderate. That's a bit unusual. If they've gone missing for a couple of days, then we might be into that sort of crisis zone. There's something wrong. In a childcare and aged care, someone's gone missing for 30 minutes. They're in crisis mode. They'll switch on full attention to find that child or that elderly person. So it depends on your business, but knowing what is a crisis and what isn't is, that's the first sort of challenge. So if you can identify and it's agreed within the business, this is a crisis because of the nature of it, the amount of money, the damage, the loss on production or operations, then okay, do we know we're dealing with a crisis? The next thing is who's on your crisis team. Now, it's interesting, a lot of people go, well, it's easy, it's just all the executive team. Well, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you need some specialists, depending on your industry, who's actually going to lead the team. And our advice that you don't actually have the CEO. They should actually step aside. It should be usually a COO or sort of a senior operations person, because the CEO should have sort of that helicopter view of what's happening. They might have to liaise with the board, regulators, investors. And the reality is the CEO might be the person that's been in the plane crash, the one that's been actually kidnapped. They could also be the person that's caused the crisis too. So and quite often CEOs aren't available. So we always say step them aside and they can have that sort of helicopter view of the business. So just knowing who's on the team, someone to represent your HR, your people, we call people and welfare, operations, your communications, who's going to do that. So having your team set, so the minute they're called upon, the team will just fall into place immediately. So that's important. And just on it, when you're called upon, how does that happen? And I've worked with companies who, in the middle of a crisis, they're on their phone trying to ring people and message them. You should have a system that can just immediately notify people. They can respond, yes, available, jump onto a Teams, Zoom meeting or other platform, and you can start, immediately to respond. So that's the next one. Then, of course, having plans, so the sort of process, and in crisis management, it's interesting. It's different to your normal meeting. So sort of some of the niceties go out of it. And I explain to clients it's actually in a paramilitary mode. So there's a fair bit of structure. We're not there to chat about the weather and, how's everyone feeling. It's this is what's happened. What are the facts have happened? What's the impact on a business? What are we going to do about it? So it's fairly clinical, to be honest, and you need that because you need to get to the point, do some actions, and start responding to the incident or the crisis. So that's the part. And the next thing is who's your subject matter experts? Who do we have to call? Who are our stakeholders? Who do we have to notify? Now, all these things, if you're trying to put that together in the midst of a crisis, it's fairly challenging. If we've predetermined all those things, it makes it so much easier. It's all, in a sense, at our fingertips. And, of course, the last thing is if you've simulated, you've done the training and you've gone through simulations, when the actual event happens, you think, well, I'm familiar with this. The real event will be a little bit more escalating, a little bit more pressure, but you'll at least had that experience. You go, all right, I'm going to get all these calls in from journalists, from staff. We're going to have these inquiries. People will be upset. There'll be a lot of questions asked. They've had that sort of experience or exposure, so it doesn't throw them off when the real event happens. So, it's even when people call us, I'm quite upfront. If you call me in the middle of a crisis, we can help, but it's still a bit limited as opposed to if you call us in beforehand and we start working and prepare you for the event rather than just waiting till the event happens and then throwing ourselves in and trying to recover.
And what you've just outlined there, like that sort of structure to it, that makes logical sense that we'd want to get that all pre-planned. What do you often see for people that don't have that sort of structure pre-planned? What happens to them during this sort of crisis moment? How does it affect them? How does it affect their decision making?
Well, as you can imagine, if you have had no preparation and you're suddenly thrown into a crisis, and imagine it's something quite serious. It might be, a death of a staff member. It might be serious allegations of, assault or corruption. Production could have stopped. Could be a food contamination. You're under a lot of pressure. A crisis, don't happen that often. And when they do happen, it's a big impact on the business. So you can't do your normal job. Most of us are fairly busy in our normal job. That has to step aside. We have to step into this role of responding to this incident. If we haven't got a clear plan of how we're going to work through it and document things, which is very important, it's just a lot of load on you if you haven't had that training and that testing. And again, I've watched people in this, and it just adds so much more pressure to them when they're already in a pressured environment that they start making mistakes. The team can actually start imploding on itself, sort of finger pointing, not having that calm and respectful way of running it, because all of a sudden they're thrown in as a team to respond to something they've had no training. It's not a good mix, and it leads to a fairly poor result.
I've seen this practically from when I lived in Germany and worked on a caravan park, and we had a flood, and one of my colleagues, she's normally quite a reasonable person and quite switched on, got pressured and went knee deep into water to turn electricity back on, because he just was so under pressure. So that's a prime practical example of what you're talking about.
Yep. Yeah.
And so that sort of stress and pressure, it's starting to make a lot of sense of the sort of chaos that we're in. What happens to communications when we're in that sort of chaotic situation, internally and externally?
Yeah, it's a good question, James. So one of the things that happens, it's interesting if you look historically through all major crises in history, one of the biggest criticisms in each one is the communication. Now, I also put out there that I doubt anyone will ever get 100% because people are always critical. We weren't told in time. We weren't told enough information. Sometimes people do communicate exceptionally well during a crisis. Those ones that have rehearsed it and trained it, know their stakeholders, know the channels. Some do a really terrific job, and they're still criticised. So, but I do just put that out there. But the important thing around communications is that quite often there's sort of different schools of camp. Quite often the company or the organisation will say nothing. They say just don't say anything, shut the door, don't answer the phone, bunker in. And sometimes that is a good approach because sometimes this thing it'll pass and everyone's forgotten about it. And again, that's a case-by-case analysis. Most times, however, people want some communication and they want it very quickly and they want to know you've acknowledged the event, you're responding to it and you're keeping people updated with what's happening. So that majority of cases, that is the best approach to have. Now, when you're communicating, again, if there's lawyers that are listening on this, I know will concur with me that you've got to be careful what you say because early on in a crisis, you don't know all the information. And if you start saying things like, look, we're sorry, it was our fault, or, something else went wrong and start making those statements, later on it might be found out that actually it wasn't your fault or it's something beyond your control, but you've opened yourself up to a lot of liability. So important by rehearsing, if we had a cyber incident, if we had a death of an employee, we had a product failure, we've already templated up a release, a media statement, which has been signed off by the comms team, the legal, the head of the organisation, and then we can comfortably put that out as an early response to the incident. As things unfold over the next few hours, days, you can then say, look, we can give a little bit more information because we've got a little bit better handle on what's happened. So communication is always paramount. People, now you're fairly exposed, social media, employees, unions, just regulatory. You've got to notify. So it's going to be out there. So you want to be, sort of directing that message, not just sitting back trying to defend it.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be in the middle of the crisis trying to work that out while trying to work out and solve what we need to solve. Yeah, and I know you're very experienced in this area, and if we bring it sort of to the technology space, you mentioned cybersecurity incidents are probably a prime example of what we face more frequently, I guess. Well, what are some examples that you've seen of people that have and organisations that have handled these sort of crises poorly compared to the ones that have done it well? What sort of the contrast look like?
Yeah, look, they're good. So look, in this, it's fascinating. In this industry, we are getting a lot of work at the moment, a lot of inquiries around cyber incidents because that's really front of mind and for good reason. I think any business that's not preparing for the cyber attack is a foolish business because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when that will occur. Now, for all your cyber security and everything, all the good measures you've put in, which is very important, it can still go wrong. And a lot of people have sort of lulled into this false security. And I meet with these companies, they say, we've put all this effort into our IT. We've spent a lot of money. We've got a CISO. We've got a CIO. We're in a really good position IT. And I go, terrific. And so you should be. That's great to know. However, running parallel to that IT component needs to be the executive, what I call a strategic response. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples. Hopefully this will really drive the point home. If we all look back at Optus, and I picked that out because it's a good case study, when Optus had their major cyber incident, the CEO went out and she said, we are not the villains, but we're not the villains here. Now, technically, she was correct. They weren't the villains. They absolutely would not have wanted to have a cyber incident. However, all the Optus customers, they saw them as the villains. You've lost my data. You didn't have enough security on cyber security. So while technically the executive was saying the right thing, the perception and the basic, if you like, the key stakeholders, their clients, their policy holders or phone plan holders were very upset. So again, their strategic response was very poor then. Another thing they did, they put their head of communications up to do a radio interview with 2GB. And I actually felt sorry for the head of comms. She was exhausted. I think probably worked 3 or 4 days straight, no sleep. And she basically had a breakdown on national radio. So, during a crisis, you want some very solid, calm people with good information, not breaking down, because that certainly made people have even less confidence in that organisation. So that's one example where it was poorly managed. And the next one, just on Optus, when they had the major outage earlier this year, and again, these things happen. So people I've found are not so critical when something goes wrong. They're critical about the way you manage it. So they had the major outage. Can happen. Could have happened to Telstra. Could happen to Vodafone or other networks. So I think we all accept that. But what happened in the wash-up is the executive, again, this strategic decision, the executive said, look, we'll give all our customers, I think it was 200 gigabyte of free data. Now, 20 years ago, that would have been a pretty good offer. Today, most of us don't use our data. So it was a bit of an insult. And again, that was then they made the situation even worse by a really poor offering. And I always say, had I been on that team as an independent, I would have said, why don't we give everyone 5% off their bill for the next 2 years? And two things out of that, people go, well, that's going to cost you a bit of money. Good. You need to experience a bit of pain because you upset me on that outage. And secondly, those customers would have stayed with you for the next 2 years. And basically, you had 2 years to get your goodwill bank up and running again, so people would renew their contracts. So there's a good example of strategic response. Another poor, on that, so overlaying it, Optus had their cyber attack, and only a short time later, remember, Medibank had a major attack. Now, with all honesty, I think Medibank handled it far better than Optus. I don't necessarily think that was because Medibank were better prepared initially. I think they watched Optus and thought, I can see what we should not be doing. And they learned very quickly that Optus said some pretty bad things and didn't work for them. So Medibank did a far better, I wouldn't say it was perfect, but a far better response because they didn't make the mistakes that Optus had. The other example I want to give you, and I think this will resonate for a lot of the people who listen, there was a company called Parento Phone based up in Brisbane, and they were fundamentally a call centre who would make calls on the behalf and not-for-profits. Had around 70 customers, and some of their customers were clients of ours. So they would then take the database from that not-for-profit, phone numbers, emails, and they would reach out to those people on behalf of the not-for-profit seeking donations. So it's a good business model. I believe they had around 200 staff, around 70 not-for-profits on their books. They had a cyber incident. It happened. It's not good, but it happened. That was around, I think, April, May last year. And they did all the right things as far as notifying the regulators, did all their compliance notification. They just missed one big stakeholder, their customers. So they failed to tell a lot of their customers about the breach in sufficient time. And, of course, over time, the customers found out. That then caused the customers to be quite concerned because they said, we accept you might have had a data breach. We don't accept that you didn't tell us in sufficient time. So Parento Phone, I think it was in October, announced that they're closed. They're no longer a business. So you've gone from from what I understand, a very profitable, well-run business, good operational business, 200 staff, and here you are 6 months later and your business is closed. And it wasn't because of the incident itself, it was because of the strategic response. And I think for me that just really highlights the value in you try and shore up your building for a cyber incident, absolutely, but you need to shore up, even more importantly, your team to respond to it, because the cyber incident within reason will be tolerated. The response to it won't. It's not run well.
I think that's a very important perspective that not a lot of people are talking about, especially in our industry. It's always focused on the tech side. We put enough technical controls in place. We have our backups we can recover, and it's all good. But that's the real example of the wider implications of these sort of incidents, crises, that we're not able to have the conversations with our clients and help them understand this. We don't necessarily need to solve those sort of communication challenges that our clients have, but us highlighting that to them can provide a lot of value.
Yeah, and look, I want to put this out there. I'm not an IT expert, but we try and read and we watch, and from talking to people like yourself and in the industry, the way AI is traveling at the moment, and the other thing is deep fakes. So there was a Japanese company who the criminals actually created a fake replication of the senior partner of the business, and the CFO, sorry. And one of the staff got a message, said, look, you've got to transfer some money, it's an urgent payment. Staff was good, said, look, I think this is fake, I don't trust it. Then got onto a Teams meeting, and the people in that Teams meeting were actually AI generated and weren't real. And the AI they'd actually listened to these people's voice, language, behaviours, and then this person was on the call and believed they were talking to real people and made the transfer. I think it was something around $40 million was transferred out. So what I'm trying to say to this is that, with all respect to the IT industry, even with the most secure, encrypted, well-trained organisation, things go wrong. And another example I've seen where there was a company got hacked because I went through all the business and said the people that had a sort of the link into the crown jewels or the vault all had to have multi-factor authentication. That all signed the documentation. Yep, I've done the training, I've done that. And one of the people in the company didn't do it, and that's where the hackers got in through there. So there's a few things out of that. One, that they got in, stole the money, and made so forth, and the data. The other one is that the insurance wouldn't cover it, because when you submit your insurance policy, everyone's done two-factor authentication. Yeah, we're fully secured. Well, actually, you weren't. So these are some of the challenges we're getting, and we've always got to be working on the IT posture, and that's great. But we've always got to work on the premise: if we get done or we get hit, we need to have that good strategic response ready to go. And again, I keep saying the public will tolerate whatever we find, will tolerate an error. Even if it's your fault, they will not tolerate if you don't manage it well.
It's human nature, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I always say, you think about it, we've all done, things that we probably regret back in our life, and but most people will turn around and go, you did make a mistake there, but you acted responsibly, and you recovered from it, and we're still with you, still backing you and support you. So
it's, as you're talking about that sort of approach to the technology aside from the cybersecurity side, is sort of tweaking my thoughts from my experience as well. Often from us as technology people, we're brought in for other types of crises, often like the insider threat of someone's gone and done something that they really shouldn't have, like you mentioned, like corruption and embezzlement, those sort of harassment cases, the things around them trying to take business from that business and start their own, all of those kinds of things. But to me, those are examples of those sort of crises that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our approach is it's called all hazards. So it's interesting. People come to us, look, I really want to train up, so we've got a cyber, response team. So look, that's great, but that cyber response team, the strategic side, is the same response team if there was a death or there was a fire or corruption. So we even have what we call a cyber playbook. So that team will come together no matter what the incident is, if it meets the criteria. And sometimes for HR, you've got a HR playbook about you do, say, for example, a death. If there's a cyber incident, we now have what we call a cyber playbook, and it's a guide for that team. Who are the regulators? What sort of time frames? What sort of questions should we be asking the IT team? And again, it's quite interesting. I've been in in crisis rooms or boardrooms, and with no disrespect, but the CIO or CISO will come in and talk about what's happened, and everyone just look around going, well, that is like in another language because we don't understand all this. So it's really just deciphering that and go, well, what does that mean in real terms? What data's been compromised? What have we been locked out of? What's operating and so forth. So it helps that team to make an assessment so they can understand, the implications on the business.
From your professional perspective, we stick to the cyber incidents for the moment because it most applies to our interactions with clients. Are the technology partners the right people to be managing it from a crisis perspective, in your opinion?
Look, from my experience, no. I mean, I haven't seen all of them, but from our experience, we've dealt with some pretty major ones. There's some very small MSPs. Generally, no. I mean, it's a bit like saying, will Crisis Shield come in and do the IT? Absolutely not. We'd make a real mess of it. It's not our area of expertise. So what those companies should be doing is partnering with someone who can then work with the client and say, particularly a client go and say, look, we've got your IT covered. Have you got a good crisis team ready to go and drilled and prepared? And some companies will go, good, that's good. You've got that all prepared. If you haven't, you should go and do it because we are actually finding some of the MSPs we partner with, they are coming to us saying, look, we have had clients come in and ask us, can you start writing media releases and doing that strategic response? They're going, whoa, it's not our area of expertise. So you need a partner who either the company has done it internally or they partner with someone who can do it for them.
Hopefully people are listening on take a big sigh of relief that it's not our burden to carry, but we should be being proactive and highlighting that this is a thing and recommending partners and that sort of stuff to help our clients. That's our value.
Yeah, it's a value. And look, it's not only a value add, it's a necessity. I mean, as I said, people will be tolerant of your cyber incident within reason. They won't be tolerant if you don't manage it well. So, being on the front foot. And I'll give you another example. When we go into a client and we're talking around cyber, I say, what sort of data do you hold? Now, if you've only got person's phone number and email address, we call that very low sensitivity. So if you've been compromised and you rang me up and said, look, Allan, we've had a cyber incident, the hackers have got your phone number and email, I go, oh, well, great, it's on the web anyhow. They ring up and say, Allan, they've got your bank account details, your passport, your driver's license, your Medicare card. I'd be freaking out because that is very sensitive data that could do a lot of damage. Now, under regulatory obligations, you've got some time to report that. But if you're a company who's holding very sensitive data, I would expect to be told that day. The sooner the better. So, again, if you're holding that data and you haven't got a plan prepared to know who your stakeholders are, be able to communicate with them, within a few hours, you're in danger. So this is where people the expectation is up there. Now, again, if you look at the regulatory side of it, it gives you quite a bit of time, but the practical, realistic time is people want to know straight away.
It's fair and reasonable, isn't it? That's the approach that you've been talking about. It's that human-centered approach to the crisis management.
And I just unpack that a little bit more. Another thing is we find we've worked with companies and said, they'll say, yeah, look, we actually hold passports and driver's license, bank account. And I said, why? And they go, oh, that's just what we do, for ID validation. So, well, you're holding very sensitive data. You're very exposed. If you don't need to hold that data, get rid of it. And we're with a major utility company recently, and they said, we're cleansing because we had all these account details, credit card numbers from clients from years ago. People no longer using our service. They're cleansing because they knew it's a huge liability, a huge danger of holding that data. So it's good for companies to have that sort of going through the simulation and are looking to go, wow, we're actually holding a lot of sensitive data that we don't need to. And then again, looking at their processes going, say, for example, I start a new account, once I've done the ID checks, they can get rid of it. They've established who the person is. We don't need to hold that data anymore. We can disregard it. It lowers our exposure if we do get a cyber attack. And one other thing I just want to touch on is when we do the simulations, it's interesting that people go, oh, yeah, look, we've got insurance cover. So we had one recently. I said, ring the insurance company, tell them you're doing exercise, tell them what's happened. So they come and set it up. So they rang the insurer and they said, we're running a simulation. This is what's happened. There's a ransom demand. We've locked out of the account, so forth. And the insurer said, first thing, do not talk to the media. And we had a simulated media crew at the front door of the company, and they were demanding to have an interview. And the other thing is they said, we're going to send 3 experts to help you. And anyhow, the head of legal hung up, and they looked at me and told me that. And I said, well, ring up the insurance company and say who are they sending and how long they'll be. So they rang back. The insurance company said, we can't tell you. We don't know. They couldn't answer that question. So, doing the simulation actually fleshes out what's actually that on that insurance policy. What does it mean? Are we covered for for a ransomware? Can we talk to the media? Who's going to come? How long will they get there? Will they be from overseas? Another simulation we ran where they emailed the insurer and they got an email back saying someone will respond to you within 24 hours. Not what you want to hear when you're in the thick of it. So again, these simulations are good just to flesh out. Another one is would you pay the ransom? Now, the federal government in Australia is recommending you don't pay the ransom, and for good reason. So I'm supportive of that in theory. The catch with that is it's all good and well if you're on a government agency because you think, well, it's the government. If I'm running my business and I've been locked out of my account and the ransoms, for example, might be $5 million, and I think if I don't get that data back, this could impact my business by tens of millions of dollars, I would seriously consider paying it. And there are different levels of threat actors who will, some actually sounds bad, but they're actually quite legitimate hackers in the sense that they will actually release the data back. So again, it's not always a simple answer, so just don't pay the ransom. Or you could have a scenario where some very sensitive data has been held, and there's a few funny stories if you do some research of data that's been held and the ransom's been put forward, and some people said, look, I just don't want that out in the public domain, and they've paid it. So again, doing a simulation, just having a position on that, will we pay, will we not pay, what's the threshold, again, insurance companies can sometimes look like they do have the capability of looking and going, that hacker is, we don't know who it is, I wouldn't trust them all. This one, yep, we're aware of them, and if you pay, generally they'll give you back the keys. So again, this is you don't want to be trying this out during the middle of a cyber incident. You want to walk through all this, had all these conversations, fleshed out what your insurance policy covers, what your board position is on this, what the executive position is on it. So if it happens, remember, we walk through this, we've had this agreed position, and we can go from there.
And that all makes 100% sense to me, and we always talk about business continuity and disaster recovery and doing that sort of simulation, so we know that we can recover the data, and we know the time to recovery and all of that kind of stuff. It's the same principle in a different way.
Yep.
But I can just hear people going, well, I'm a small business. This crisis management stuff sounds like it's for enterprise and big governments. Is that the case?
Look, unfortunately, it's very wrong. Look, you're right. I mean, there's an expectation a big enterprise would have this, and they should. I mean, your Optus and all your telcos, your banks, your big corporates, absolutely, and most of them have. How well they do it, that's a bit open. And we saw Optus is a good example. Now, when you get to a small operator, it might be a 1 to 1 million to 10 million turnover, and I think, look, I can't afford to have a company like us come in and spend that. And you're right, it is a lot. What you need to do is then go and start looking, well, I need to have some sort of crisis module, and we do offer that, an online version, but you need to have something in place. So, again, putting together, we call it just an action plan, a light plan, a team, and then you're ready to respond. And there's a couple of things will happen out of this. One is if you're a smaller firm and that happens, in that initial phase, you may be able to manage it if you've prepared for it, and you might be able to take the heat out of people, go, look, yep, were well communicated. You're on top of it. You're a small business. You're not sort of in the spotlight of the media and others or regulators. So you can manage that way. If it escalates up and it becomes a huge event, then you call someone like the likes of ourselves to come in and help you assist in it. So that every business, no matter what size, should have their basic crisis plan. So who's on it, who's going to fulfill what roles, how we're going to log it, how we'll meet, some prepared response drills that we've run through. And again, not just for cyber, but if we had, the death of an employee, for example, if you're a trucking firm or a transport firm, what if one of our trucks goes through remember we had that horrific accident on the freeway in Melbourne and 4 police got killed. And the driver was, I think he was on drugs at the time. So, imagine that business. This suddenly escalates up. Not only has he just killed 4 police officers, he was under the influence of drugs and so forth. So, no matter what your industry, you should think, what's on our risk register? What do the insurers charge us the most for? They see the risk in our business. They're always the two things I look at. You go, all right, well, they're the ones we should be most prepared for. Other things can happen, but have we prepared for these things that have been identified? If it did happen, have we got the team together, how we communicate, how we record it, and we've rehearsed it. So if it does happen, we are absolutely ready to go. So small businesses, you can't just walk away and say, look, we're small, we're exempt. It doesn't work like that anymore.
Well, there's some good practical insights to bring it down into reality. And I think what I hear from a lot of that is it's mainly the human element, especially in the small business. It's all our reputation, all our relationships. If this stuff happens, it impacts our employees. It impacts the employees of our clients that we work with. It's a bit probably there's faces to it compared to the big Optus breaches and stuff that are just a faceless big event. This is very personal. So take that responsibility on, take some steps. And like you said, it doesn't need to be too overly complicated because we're usually dealing with smaller crises generally.
Yeah. Well, it could be a big crisis for you, but if you imagine you're a small firm and you might be a B2B and the people you're doing business with, you've got a good relationship with them. And for example, you had a major cyber incident. For you, it's major. You've locked out your accounts, you may have a ransom. Now, if I'm trading with you, doing business with you, and you contact me and say, look, this is what's happened. We've got our IT working on it. Don't accept anything from us as far as payments or anything concerned. We think everything's been compromised. We'll come back to you in 24 hours with an update. If you've got any questions, here's like a hotline, or ring me. I'm the CEO or COO. Ring me on this number. I would be very comforted by that. Now, that all sounds very simplistic, but to do that and work across all the different things from regulators, insurance companies, communications, internal staff, all your external stakeholders, that's where you need that team formed and ready to go. So if it happens, you go, all right, bring the team in. This has happened. We've walked through this before. Bang. Let's do what we call the action plan. We know who's going to do what jobs. Let's regroup in a few hours. We'll all go off and do our tasks, and we'll reassess it then. High chance you'll get through okay.
Well, we could keep diving more and more deeply in this. You live and breathe this type of stuff, and I find it extremely fascinating. We've covered a lot of things today. What do you really want people to take away from this session, and what's the practical next steps if they don't have a crisis management plan? What should they do?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to look at is you should be fully aware, look at your risk register and your insurance. So in your business, what does the insurer and you should have a risk register and saying what's the risk in your business? Is it your food delivery? Is it your staff? Is it the region you work in? So look at that and go, all right, so just say something went wrong. Right? So for example, I'm manufacturing cupcakes, all right? And for some reason, a whole batch goes out and there's something wrong and people got sick. Some may have even died. What will we do? So we've got, for instance, we've got regulatory, we've got to put notice, we've got to notify the regulators, we'd have to put advertising in newspapers, we have to notify our distributors. So if you could then think, all right, how would I bring the team together? Who would be on the team? How to manage that? If you've got that all well packed and rehearsed, great. And I always say a simulation is the best thing because that really starts to flesh out just how ready we are. And if you haven't, give us a call or give someone who works in this space a call because you need to have a basic plan at a minimum. And the other thing I keep going back to this too is it's interesting. Our industry is not regulated. There's no regulatory requirement to have a crisis plan. There is quite often for an emergency plan, AS 3745, plan for emergencies and facilities, and sometimes there's a regulatory requirement around business continuity. So a lot of people go, well, there's no regulatory requirements, so I won't do it. However, if you haven't done that and you're starting to do B2B and the insurer's looking at that, if you can't demonstrate you've taken good steps to be prepared, they won't look favourably on you because they know, well, there's operators out there can provide these plans and training, and you haven't done anything in this space. Not only just the real implication of not being able to manage it, but when it comes to applying for insurance and if there's an investigation, people go, well, you actually had no preparation whatsoever. It doesn't look favourable for you. So it's I suppose the underlying thing out of this, go and do a simulation. Do it internally. Get someone to just call in. You can maybe go home and talk to your partner and say, all right, you're the CEO. I want you to ring the office tomorrow and say, pretend you're a hacker, or ring and say that you've eaten some of our product and you've got sick. You've been harassed in the office. You're going to Fair Work, or you're making a civil claim, and just see what the business would do. And walk through, all right, how will we notify each other? How would we know if that was a crisis? Who would come in on the team? How will we document all this? And if you can flow through that, with comfort, great. If you find you're struggling, well, you can multiply that by 100 in a real event.
I love that, and I think what I've taken away from this episode and all the lessons that you've been sharing with us, Allan, is as technology partners, the best thing we can do is shine a light on this and elevate it up and have that partner ecosystem for someone else to come and fill it in for our clients and get someone external to help us with our own stuff as well. Because if we want to be treated like a tradie still, you act like that and you won't have these sort of conversations. You won't be at that sort of board level, won't be at the strategy level. Or if you start to bring extra added value like this to help your clients in a more broader way, even just by sharing a contact to get them help, that's what elevates you up the decision tree, the value chain, whatever you want to term it. So I see these as sort of fantastic ways to help us help our clients. So this has been awesome, Allan. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, just one last thing on that is so you've got a client, you're an MSP, you're providing a client, they've had a cyber incident, you've gone in, supported them, you've done a terrific job, but they've done a lousy job on the strategic side, and the net result is the thing was a disaster. Right? They've lost clients, they've had a huge hit on their reputation, so it's going to actually then shine back on you. You go, well, gee, we did everything textbook. We recovered the system very quickly and that, but the net result for that business was it was a shit outcome because everyone thought we handled it poorly. We didn't notify people. Yeah, so it's it's really complimentary because if and on the other hand too, if the IT recovery side didn't work so well, but it was very well communicated, they'll go, well, IT side still wasn't great, but you know what? You guys were so good at communicating, keeping us up to date and that, great. I'll staying with you, and it could still end up being a reasonably good result. So either way, you're going to win with a good strategy.
So that's a really good point to wrap up on. You've given us some amazing insights and a different perspective to this, and I hope the listeners and viewers take this and action something out of it. Because the ones that do are going to flourish. The ones that don't are going to struggle. So thank you so much, Allan, for joining me, and appreciate your time.
Great. Thanks, James. I really appreciate the opportunity. And, I hope it's been of value for people today.